Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Maggie Wray from Creating Positive Futures Coaching, where we are on a mission to help high school and college students develop the time management, organization, and study strategies that they need to succeed in school. And one of the biggest sources of stress that we find for many of our students is this whole college process. It's so overwhelming. It's just so daunting to know where to even begin to get into the schools that they're excited about, to know how to stand out in the process. And so this is why I'm really excited to be back again this year, hosting our Your Teen Ready for College conference, where we get to bring in people who are actually in the college admissions world, who are helping students with this process every day, and who can share their insights and information with you about how to navigate this whole college journey with less stress and more success for you and your teen. So one topic that I think adds to the stress quite a bit when it comes to college is how many expectations there are on students to be involved and to have leadership activities and to be doing all of this outside of the classroom. So beyond their studying and their classes, which they're also supposed to be doing really well with, they're also supposed to be really involved. But then we also don't want to have our kids get super overcommitted. And so I'm very excited about our conversation today with Julie Kim, who is an expert on what really top tier colleges are looking for when it comes to students' extracurriculars and their involvement and their engagement. And she's going to give us the real story about what you should actually be shooting for with your extracurricular activities. Julie's a great person to talk with us about this because she's actually a graduate of USC and Harvard. So she's been to top schools and she knows what it's like to get in there. And then she also mentors high school students to help them find their passion and their strengths and use those passions to get accepted into top schools. And she's a really big believer in the fact that even though the college application process is demanding and stressful and competitive, and it seems like that's what the way you've got to think about it to be successful, it doesn't have to be all of those things if you approach it the right way and really come into the process with more authenticity and passion. So I love the way you think about this, Julie. I'm so excited to have you on today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk all about passion and college admissions, all things I love.
Well, that's fantastic. I'd love to jump in here on this overcommitted topic because I really do think we hear these messages about, oh, you've got to be involved and, your common application has 10 different spots for activities. So there's this expectation you have to be doing a lot of things. And I'll talk to kids who are in 6 different clubs and they've got 3 different sports and they're just burning the candle at, it feels like more than 2 ends. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is this the right thing? Is this even what they should be doing? And if not, how do we get out of this craziness?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we see this a lot with high school students who are aiming for Ivy Leagues and top tier thinking, okay, well, if I need to beat the 5% statistics, if I need to stand out, I'm going to show them that I can do a lot. And so that results in high school students joining 4 to 5 clubs just because they feel like having that on their resume is going to help them get in, right? Mm-hmm. And so they would join Interact Club, Key Club, Best Buddies, CSF, DECA. And what you're essentially doing then is spreading yourself way too thin. And yes, there are 10 spots where you can write about your extracurriculars in the common application. But honestly, when students have about 15 to 20 that they want to put in there, we can't even add all of those things in. And what we want to do with that 10 extracurriculars is to create a story out of it. So if you decided to go for Best Buddies and work with a student with a disability, why? Why is that so important to you? And how did that activity lead to another one? Because your involvement with these students was so enriching for you, right? So we want the activities to create a story, tell us about who you are and what this means to you. And that's what really triggers the admission officers because it gets them to think, wow, this student has these set of values and we can see that in all parts of the application. Wow, like we would love to have this student on our campus because we have something like that. And I feel like she would be a great leader to carry that legacy, right? And so it's that phrase where we always talk about, they're not looking for a well-rounded student. They're looking for a well-rounded class, right? So you want to be known for something. And what you want to be known for is something that is really true to you, something that you do because you love it, something that you're doing because it's just a part of who you are, right? So that's why we always talk about, finding your interest, finding your passion, and things like that. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
It absolutely does. And I think the hard part is letting go of the things that you feel like, oh, but I've invested this time in this. So I'll give you a super specific example. I was working with a
Yeah.
family this year, and it was a student who's I mentioned triple sports. I mean, she was doing tennis. She's been doing that for years. She was then also doing track, but then her real love was cross country. So she would go home from track and run more for cross country. And she's trying to take all these AP classes, and she doesn't get back from her runs until 8:30 at night. She doesn't have time to do all of this. So I brought up, maybe let's cut tennis. If that's not your love, it's not your passion. But I think she and her mom, especially her mom, kind of felt like, but she's been doing this for years, and doesn't a college want to see continuity? Don't they want to see that you've had sustained interest in something? So we hate to let this go when we've already been involved in it. I'm curious what your take is on that, about how that weighs for or against a student if they're letting go of some activities so that they can focus in more on their passion.
Yeah, they have a really hard time letting go of. They like hold on to it, right?
It's mine. It's mine. I've been doing it and I'm working on it. I know, it's so hard.
Exactly. And so one of the triggering points of you should drop this extracurricular is when their academics are being affected. Right. So if you can juggle tennis, if you love cross country because that's what makes you really excited and you love that competitive aspect of playing a sport and you have that, that identity on campus that you're the sports girl or someone who is athletic, yeah, you can go ahead and do it. But if it's affecting your AP classes, if you're coming home with C's and F's and, just if it's bothering and hindering your academics, then that's when you know that what you're doing is not really serving you, right? And so obviously we want to prevent that.
Right. Before you get to that point, for sure.
But the student needs to work through this set of questions that I give them. And I call that ego versus higher self. And so ego means that you're making a decision because you want to show off to other people, or that's sort of like your surface level identity, right? And so you're doing it from a place of fear. If I drop tennis, then I can't hang out with those girls anymore, or those girls might think that I'm a failure now because I'm dropping out. So that's all coming from fear, which is coming from your ego. Your higher self is coming from a place of abundance, right? So you're not scared about what other people are thinking of you. You're not scared or judging yourself in any way. If anything, that's where sort of like the self-love comes in, right? I want to do what's best for me. And that means that I'm going to let go of tennis because I know that in the deepest part of my, higher self that I want to do track. So you need to understand the difference between how am I making this decision? And if it's coming from ego, you need to first admit it and then drop it gracefully. And honestly, that's hard in the beginning because you're kind of like, what? Like, what is this ego talk, higher self-talk? But it's really going to serve you in the long run. It's going to be healthier for you because you can't be too hard on yourself that you need to juggle all of these things and AP classes and all of those things. So I have a very good and deep conversation with my students. Let's check in. Is this coming from fear or is this coming from, you appreciating yourself and self-love? So it gets a little bit onto the mental health track, but I think they overlap in so many ways. So
they overlap enormously. Yeah. And what's striking me, a couple of things that are striking me actually, Julie, about what you shared. One is this is a life skill, right? Your ability to look at what's on your plate and say which of these is in line with my vision of who I want to be and what's coming from my higher self versus what's, a fear of letting people down, or, I feel like I need to please everyone by taking on all these things. So you're really teaching them to be very mature adults by asking that question, which is fantastic. And I feel like a lot of the college admissions process is driven by fear. It's not even just the extracurriculars. It's what classes am I going to take? And I'll hear students say things like, oh, but I've got to take that AP class because it's the harder AP class and they're going to like that one better than this other one. And just this whole process, I think, is driven by what are other people going to think of me? And it definitely comes in with the extracurriculars as well. So I'm curious how how do you get students to shift out of that mindset of focusing on so much on what other people want and what society wants and what colleges and college admission officers want, and shift back into a place of, here's what I want? Is that ego versus higher self enough to do it? Are there other tools they can use? Because this is a tough one.
Yeah, so all of our actions and thoughts and decisions come from our set of beliefs, right? And those beliefs are set when we were young from our parents, our friends, our community, and our school. And so maybe you have a belief system that, if I take a lot of AP classes, I'm going to be seen as a smart student. Or if I go to USC, then I'm going to be a successful person. So that's a set of beliefs that you have. And that belief is what's actually causing you to take a lot of fear-based decisions. And so you need to write. So what I have my students do is, and I also practice myself because, this is always a, ongoing process. So write down all of the beliefs you have about college admission process, about yourself, and just list all of them out and see how many of them are really negative, how many of them are really fear-based, and rewrite your beliefs. For me, success is that I get into a college, one of the Ivies, that really focus on liberal arts, writing, and political science. And to me, that's what gives me that feeling of fulfillment and success. And so if you were to rewrite your set of beliefs, then what you decide to do and what you think about and what you feel is going to be totally different. And you're not just saying, oh, I'm so scared that they're not going to pick me, but instead it's like, you know what? I'm so confident of who I've become because I love writing. I love political science. I can't wait to study this in that college. And I know reasons why I'm such a good fit for them. Right? So then you are shifting the way that you're approaching this process altogether. And when we do that, when we come to writing college essays and all of that, the vibe, the energy is totally different from the student, right? And so that shift from changing your belief system and then changing your thoughts and feelings, it's not easy. Because I think if it were easy, then everyone would do it and everyone would be happy.
Right. It sounds great. Who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, but it takes time and it takes work. But with anything, if you put in the consistency and a belief system that you can get there, then you can change that around in no time. And I think that's hard to do for high school students because it's not, you can't see it. It's not like something where you join a club and you see an immediate result. It's something that's very up in the air. You don't really see it, but that mindset is going to have you create awesome passion projects. It's going to have you reach out to people you thought you would never reach out to because you were scared before. Maybe you decide to drop an AP class because you know yourself that you're not going to, you're not a math student, right? Or maybe math is not your strength. And so, you know what, I'm just going to take pre-calculus this year. And that's fine because I know that that's going to result in me getting straight A's because I'm really strengthening and pinpointing my strength rather than trying to do everything at once. And another thing for high school students to note is that there is no such thing as perfection. You don't need to be perfect at every single thing. No one gets 5s on their APs. The best public speaker, best writer, gorgeous, nice body, good personality, like those things do not exist. And I think that social media plays a huge role in showing these teenagers, oh, look at this Instagram model, look at this person, perfect, pretty, smart, rich. And I think if I were a high school student this time, I would have been really influenced because even as an adult, when I go on Instagram, I'm like, oh, wow, she's so gorgeous. She's so successful. And I get a little bit triggered. And so knowing that no one is perfect, but that you get to embrace who you are and just using that to make decisions about your college admissions journey. In a matter of time, fear will no longer be there. Yeah.
It's so important what you're sharing. And I think it's a totally different way of looking at the extracurriculars. So, because I'm imagining that what they might write down as those belief statements is the more that I do, the better chance I have of getting in. Or if I don't do as many extracurriculars as my friend, they're going to be the one who gets in, not me. So I think there's that underlying belief. And I'm curious if you can just tackle that from the standpoint of what you've seen anyway, with students who do successfully get into these top tier colleges. Is that even true? Is that if you do more, colleges will have a better chance of letting you in? And assuming you can keep your grades. So keeping grades constant, because I know the kids who are they're going to sacrifice sleep or they're going to sacrifice mental health before they sacrifice grades. Grades will stay there, but they imagine, oh, if I take on more commitments, colleges will like me more and I'll be able to get in. Is there any evidence you could give them that might help us squash that belief a little bit or rewrite it to be more accurate?
Absolutely. So first of all, doing more does not result in you being seen as a more competitive applicant. If anything, college admission officers sort of look at your resume and application with a skeptical viewpoint. Like, how did you do all of this? And I learned this earlier in my career because there was this training where the Stanford college admission officer was laying out all of the students' extracurricular. And the first thing that she said was, how is this even possible? You know, how did you do all of this, right? And so when there's too many activities, what that will do for you, will actually go against you, is that you can't tell a good story. And through a story in your application is where they could extract out your values and your personal qualities. And if you're writing all about your extracurriculars, then like, how do they know who you really are other than the fact that you did so much of that? So first of all, yes, doing a lot will not result in you being a competitive applicant. And the way that I approach this is I break it down into two components. So I have all my students have a theme for their application. And so it's a combination of academic interest plus personal interest plus your values, right? And so with your academic interest, let's say that you're interested. So let me give an example of one of my students. She was very interested in the government and the election, and there was a lot of issue with gun control last year. So she was just very, very interested in that. So we knew that she was going to go into political science for sure. And so that was her academic interest. And so within that realm, we would deepen her list of extracurriculars. So for instance, maybe she attended the march for women's rights. And then afterwards, she wrote an article about that, and she got on a guest post where she was featured. So her article was published, right? So you see that what she's doing is not just to do a lot, but then it deepens her level of engagement, so much so that if the college admission officer were to speak with her, she would sort of be kind of like an expert from the teenager's perspective. Like, yeah, I'm really passionate about this. I was involved in A, B, and C. I've done this. I was featured here. So passionate about this, right? So that's her academic interest. Now, there are some students who are like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. And that's okay, because some people figure it out when they're 22. Some figure it out when they're like 5 years old. You just never know, right? And so if academic interest has not been sort of solidified, then you could also, nurture your personal interests as well. So I have students, I had a student, this is a student that I have right now. She's actually working on a children's book, publishing a children's book, because she wants to combine her personal interest in illustration, writing, and kids. I think it's so adorable. And she's having so much fun with it. And she's not attending any summer programs. That's all we're working on, because that's what she's truly interested in. And through that, you learn about negotiation, you learn about designers, you learn about publishing, publishing process. You learn about taking the perspective of a kid. So you just learn so many adult skills through this one children's book. Of course, we're going to deepen it even more by raising money with it and just, doing amazing things with the children's book, right? And so that's that. And then the value part is what's important to you. So for some students, they love going out and helping others, while other students, they don't really feel like they have that in them intrinsically. And so if you don't want to volunteer, you don't need to. You don't need to get yourself out there, force yourself and get those hours just because you think it's going to look good on the application. And that's what I see a lot in students' resume when I first work with them. They're like, yeah, I have 500 hours. I have 400 hours. And they're like so proud of it. And I'm like, oh, why did you do this? Why is this so important to you? And they're like, oh, I just went with the club. Like, the reason is not compelling enough,
It's not really a reason that is compelling to them at all, other than I'm going to do it because it looks good. And so that sounds like a really good litmus test to see, am I doing this activity for the right reasons? What you're describing with the children's book and that, and the politics, the going to the march and the writing the article, these are things that these kids are really passionate about. And what's interesting about them is it doesn't even sound like that's necessarily oh, I did it through a club, or I signed up for this, or it almost sounds like they're creating something of their own rather than going ahead and just signing up for something that already exists.
Absolutely. And when I say this, and we call this the passion project because I want all of my students to have a passion project that they're excited about. Some parents will say things like, well, there are so many summer programs out there, so are you disregarding them altogether? Absolutely not. Some students, they want to go to a summer program to see what's out there, to get influenced, get inspired. So there are different reasons for everything. And so just wanted to mention that so that, your audience is not thinking, oh, are you just disregarding summer programs altogether? Absolutely not. I think every program serves its purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think what you're sharing is a little bit different than that. It's more of a don't limit yourself to existing programs. If you're really passionate about something and you're trying to deepen that interest, it really sounds like instead of going broad, you're trying to encourage kids to go deep into their passion and their interest. Does it have to be one, or can they have more than one theme in their application?
Usually having a clear theme is helpful. So when we talk about the theme, we have academic and personal and value. So that in itself is pretty jam-packed into the application. So we just tend to work with one theme so that it's not too confusing. And just they only have 3 years to really show that. So we usually work with one theme. But I think if students have more things that they want to add on to, why not?
I wonder if there's ever a way to combine interests, if they've kind of got what feels like two different things. Have you ever seen kids be able to kind of combine them by doing some activity that like pulls both of those interests together? I'm struck by your kids one. Like maybe she had done things with kids and then she'd done art classes, and then there's kind of a way to merge.
Absolutely. So most of my students, they do merge them together. And that's actually a really good tip because then you don't need to do one academic, one personal, one this, one that. We just merge them together and it's just one single project that you can demonstrate both academic and personal. So I had a student where he was going to aerospace engineering, and so he took all these engineering classes, did research with professors, did internships at Lockheed Martin. But then he was also in love with teaching. And so what we did is we created a 5-day summer camp for public middle school students. So middle school students who are attending public schools, where they don't have any hands-on opportunities when it comes to computer science because, the funds and things like that. So he created a 5-day summer camp for these kids I believe it was like 20 to 25 students. And so many teachers joined this movement, this camp, and they were just blown away by how he combined his academic interest into what he really loved doing, which was to teach and help others who don't have that access. And then he got into Georgia Tech, UIUC, Rice University. It's amazing. And so, yeah, that's a perfect example. And, typically we do try to combine both of them together so that they have more time to study and prepare for test prep. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense because you're right. If it was something that was going to take a huge amount of time, I mean, there are some things that might be too involved to even be able to fit into your schedule. But most of the ones that you described could either be done over a summer, it sounds like, or that camp, it wasn't like a year-long activity. He wasn't teaching a class that was meeting all year long. This was a short-term summer project where he was able to teach this camp and then he was done with it. So it's interesting because I think that students hear about a project like that and they think, oh my gosh, that sounds so hard. I could never do that. But I wonder if it might actually end up being less time consuming sometimes than some of the clubs that they go sign up for and attend every single week for 2 years.
Yeah. They build up, right?
They do. That's time consuming. So it's more like you're strategically allocating your time differently, more so than you're saying, oh, you've got to add this passion project on top of it.
No, not at all. Passion project is going to be your number one priority because that's what you're passionate about or that's what you're interested in. And so what I do is I help my students set metrics for themselves so that you don't procrastinate with your passion project. So every month we produce a tangible outcome, right? or tangible results. So I have a few students who are running their own blogs and their own websites. So I tell them, okay, Jen, for this month, we're releasing one blog post. And then that keeps the website going every single month. And then for the student who did the 5-day summer camp, even though it seemed very short, the preparation was immense.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to reach out to all the elementary school teachers, the middle school teachers, to see if that was even possible, arrange the classrooms, get the consent, create the curriculum. And so those are all the things that we add to the essay and into the application to let them know, hey, this is not easy. However, because this is so important to me, I was able to do this. So it takes time, but if you plan in advance and you set tangible results for every month, then totally possible. And you could also do all of this at your home. And so I think that's the power of this generation, that you can research people, email people, network and get more info all online, and then actually implement in a given time. So, and I think that's really important for high school students these days because they're so busy, and staying home and being able to do it from the comfort of their room is also very important.
Absolutely. Well, and you're speaking my language with the metrics and the timelines. We work so much with students on time management and organization. This makes me so happy that you do this with the tangible outcomes, because it does definitely combat procrastination. So I love the way you're going about this. And I'd love to ask a couple more tangible questions in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to get this kind of thing done as well. Because I think for most kids, they're very comfortable signing up for an existing extracurricular. The idea of, okay, now I'm going to try to create this thing called a passion project, that feels very out of their comfort zone. And so first of all, I think some students are just completely stumped when they think about what on earth would I do for something like that. These all sound cool, these projects you described, but I have no idea how I would create something like that. I don't feel like I've got a strong sense of what my personal interests are, or even my academic interests. How do you help a student who's just stuck like that and they're not really sure what they're passionate about yet?
Yeah, so the word passion is just really overused these days. And I see a lot of media saying, you don't go find passion. Like, passion is something that comes naturally to you. So one thing that I do want to demystify to all teens listening to this and watching this is that passion is not something that you find just like that. It just happens, and without even knowing it, it's sort of there. So it's not something where you go out and get it and bring it back home. So given that, Angela Duckworth, who is the author of Grit, and she's a professor at UPenn, I'm sure you know, she wrote a book on grit. And she talks about the difference between interest and passion, and saying that, passion or whatever you're interested about comes to you with multiple layers of exposure. So if you are staying home all day watching YouTube, playing games, and you're like, oh, poor me, like, where's my passion? I see this girl like doing blogs and going out there, I'm like, poor me, right? So number one, you're in a victim mentality. Number two, you're not doing anything about it. You need to go out there and experience, because without experience, you will never know whether you like it or not. And so that's when summer programs and internships and volunteering could come really handy, because that's when you can sort of see, I like this or I don't like this. And then you could ask the ego versus higher self questions when you do that. And so that's what really gets my students to say, oh, Julie, you know what? I volunteered at the mental, the hospital where they treat children with mental illness. And that's so fascinating to me. I never thought that before, but after volunteering, I feel very connected. And so basically we dug deeper, and she was like, yeah, you know what? I want to study neuroscience, or I want to study psychology. Do you see like the academic major that are coming out? So it's like, wow, like an experience is just worth millions and millions of dollars, because it really gets you to pinpoint what your academic interest might be. And so that's how we find it. And it's the best way, because I don't want to tell my students like, hey, I want you to go into biology because you want to be a doctor. Let's test it out first. Why don't you shadow some dentist, doctor, surgeon, get on a phone call with them, go on a Skype call. If not, visit them in the office. Or you have a lot of networks, right? So ask your cousin who is a friend of this and that, and shadow and check it out. And so with that exposure, we find out the academic interest. And then personal interest, students know. They're like, oh, I love drawing. I love making candles. I have a student, she loves baking. So her mom and I talk about their story all the time because I think it's so adorable. They love baking. And basically what she's doing is she's creating a blog where she's posting her recipes and her YouTube videos on how to bake certain things. And she learned all of that from her mom. But what she wants to get across with her message is that you don't need fancy equipment. You don't need fancy ingredients. You can bake anytime at your home. And that's her personal interest. And she's actually going to Pakistan this summer. And she wants to teach how to bake to the students who've never baked before. So it's it just creates an awesome story, right? It's a personal interest is usually easy to find. And then in terms of values, is I ask the question, like, what's important to you? And then using that, we sort of think, all right, if research is very important to you, then let's go with that. And I think one question that you asked with this was, what if like this is so overwhelming, right? Like, how can I start this from scratch? And when I talk about passion project, I'm not only talking about creating something of your own, because not everyone is born to be a creator. But what you could do is you can also use your passion project in the field of research. So I have students who are working on research study projects with the professor, with the PhD student, and just helping out collecting data. That could be your passion project as well. I have a student who is doing, he's really interested in aging and why we age. And so he's using probiotics to do this. Obviously I'm not in that field, but he's doing this crazy research study on his own with the advisor at his school. So that's your passion project. Like, you're not creating anything from scratch, but you are diving into an academic interest within the realm of research that you're passionate about. So this student is not creating anything from scratch, and he's having a passion project, right? So I think it could go into 3 ways. 1, research, 1, internship, and just like working at a startup that you're interested in. And then you could also create something of your own. So I feel like it separates into 3. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, and I love that you are pointing out that you don't necessarily have to start with a burning passion and this deep desire that you've had from the time you were 2 to do this thing. Because I think it's hard, because if that's the expectation and that's what students are expecting to feel, then they'll say, oh, but I don't have any passions. But what you described is you start with an interest, or at least an openness to go out and start to experience some things. And then that openness grows into an interest, which grows into a passion over time with experience. So thank you for shifting our expectations about that, because I think that'll open the door for more students to get involved in this type of thing. And you kind of also answered another question I was going to ask, which was the service component, because it sounded like a lot of your projects had some component of giving back or being of service as part of them. And I was curious if that is necessary for it to count as a passion project. But then you brought up the research. So I was curious about that. Do you find most students' passion projects have some service involved, or is that important to universities to see that kids are giving back in some way? Or is that not really important as long as it's something that they're really interested and passionate about themselves?
Yeah, so I would say 50% of my students are doing something that's related to service that demonstrates their sympathy, empathy, whereas in other students are just doing something that's not related to giving back at all. So that goes back to what's important to you. What are your values? Is it important that you're impacting the community? Is it important that you're helping people? If your answer is heck yes, then yeah, let's go for it. If your answer is like, to be honest, Julie, I've never really felt that urgency to help others. Like, I just don't have it within me. And I'm like, well, that's okay. That's just who you are. You don't need to, forcefully go out there and help others so you can get on the application. So likewise, they do internships or they do something that's a little bit more on the technical side, research. And so, yeah, that's what my students do. Not everyone is doing service. However, there was a report published by Harvard 2016, I believe. It's a Turning the Tide initiative. And basically that report was saying, we want students to talk more about empathy. We want students to talk more about kindness. And so they were saying in that report that the community service is going to be very important. However, I don't force it with my students, to be honest, because I think it's just doing a disservice if you go somewhere to help out just so that you can get the hours and then come back home. I just don't, that's just my personal philosophy. So in regards to college admissions process, yes, that helps to help others, but it needs to be, genuine.
Right. And I get the sense that they can see through that if it's not. I mean, they read so many thousands of these applications that if they get the sense that the
Yeah.
student is just doing this to sort of put in the time and that their heart's not in it, I really do believe that they're going to see right through that. I mean, has that been your experience as well for kids who just do things to do things because they quote unquote look good? They actually don't look good because they know that you're just doing it to look good. And so
Right.
it's that interest or that genuine just engagement with the activity in front of you that is what they're really looking for, is what I'm imagining, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, what's your impression of that?
Yeah, they know, 100%. The reason that they can tell whether this is real or not, I believe, is that when there is not enough emotion or imagery. So when you're writing your essay about, so let me give you an example. When I was writing for both undergrad and grad, actually for the grad application, you still have to write an essay. And I could have written that, oh, I went to a local elementary school near USC. It's a low income neighborhood, mostly Hispanics and African Americans. And I taught them math, right? So that could be like one way to say it. It's like, okay, that's good to know. But the way that I demonstrated that in a different way was I wrote about how I walked into the classroom and the classroom literally smelled like the restroom, right? The fragrance, it was just, and I was like, kids study here in this room 6 hours a day. And I was traumatized. And then the kids didn't have pencils. They didn't bring pencils from home. And these were fifth, sixth graders learning multiplication tables. We learned that in third grade, right? So I saw all of these things happening, and that affected me. And that's why it's so important for me to be in this field of education. And then I wrote all of that into my essay. And when you see that versus, oh, I volunteered at elementary school, it's the same story, same extracurricular, but totally different message. And so that's how they can tell. And I believe that's the way I don't know for 100% as I've never been on that side, but that's what I help my students really focus on. Like, how did you feel? What did you see? Why was this so important to you? And when you address that, they know whether it's real or not, you know?
That completely makes sense. And they're going to see that theme running through your application. And if you go in for an interview and you talk about it, then that passion is going to come through. And there's so many ways. And if you're worried about this and you're watching this interview and thinking, oh my gosh, how do I communicate this in an essay? Don't worry, we're going to talk about essays later in the series. So we're going to cover that as well. How you get that emotion out on a page, even if you don't feel like you're a quote unquote good writer. So don't worry, it's coming. But it's really, really important and essential, because if you don't have that activity, it doesn't matter how good you are at getting emotion on the page. You don't have any emotions there to write about because you only did it because you thought it quote unquote looked good to the admissions officer. So I love your focus on passion and the fact that you're trying to grow that passion from a genuine just place of openness and interest, not trying to start there. It just seems like the way you approach this puts so much less pressure on students. And I kind of want to just wrap up by asking this question about the way we all approach the college admissions process. And I'm saying we all because I feel like there's a societal stress around college. And I'm wondering how it changes the process for kids that you've seen anyway, when you approach it from this place of passion and being, in line with your higher self. What happens to kids when they change the conversation like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think students learn to be true to themselves. I think students practice self-integrity at an earlier age. And when you have self-integrity, and if you tell yourself, oh, I'm going to do what I've promised myself that I'm going to do, I'm not going to procrastinate, and that relates to time management, all of those things. Students are so proactive. Like the way that so when we're writing emails to colleges or when we're reaching out, networking, doing passion projects, they are the one who's excited to do this, right? I am not here to tell you what to do every step of the way. Of course, I give them, an outline to work with and how to brainstorm, but these students are coming into our calls and just they are excited to see what more they could do. And once you have your first win, which was maybe you published your first blog post, or maybe you volunteered at a local homeless shelter and gave out coffee. Once you have that one win, there's nothing you can't do. You see so much potential in yourself, right? And so the approach that I take, and the things that we talk about with higher self-passion, I think it's giving the students more confidence, peace, more self-integrity, regardless of where they go for college, right? Obviously, going to a good college and a good fit for you is important, but I feel like I'm shaping their lives. And to me, that's really the essence of why we go to college. Like, you want to go into UPenn or USC because you know that that place is going to even help you grow even more. It's going to give you the resources that you need. So I hope that answered your question. Did I?
It does. It definitely does. Well, and I love it. I'm just so happy about this vision that you're describing about these kids who are really being their authentic selves and who are just these intrinsically motivated learners who are passionately running after the thing that they're excited about. And I don't know any student or parent who would not want that. And I'm thrilled that there is a way to approach college that helps students think of it more like that and really become their higher selves more so than worrying so much on the others. So it's a testament to the fact that the college process can be what you make of it. It doesn't have to be this cutthroat competitive thing that stresses students out and gives them anxiety and all of that and puts them into this comparison trap. It can be a wonderfully fulfilling process that actually helps teach you a whole lot about yourself along the way. And the vision you painted of that is such a great example of how to do it well. So thank you, Julie. This has been so fun. And I really love everything you had to share. I want to make sure families know also how to follow up with you for more information if they would like to learn more about your approach and just continue to stay in touch with you. What would be the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of social media outlets. First, we have a podcast, the Mystifying College Admissions podcast on iTunes and Spotify everywhere, where I talk about all this kind of stuff. So mindset plus strategy. So we have the podcast, and we invite guests from Ivy League's top tier so that students are just understanding a little bit more about this process from someone who's been there, right? So we do that. And then we also have a YouTube channel, Conquer College Admissions, and Facebook group, Conquer College Admissions, and then also my website, juliekimconsulting.com. So yeah, we have a lot of free resources that your audience could take advantage of.
That's fantastic. And we actually, everyone who's watching, we will post a link below to one of the resources that Julie just mentioned. It's 5 ways to strengthen your college applications. And we're going to post a link right below this video. So if you haven't yet looked at that link below and then clicked on it to go to Julie's website, make sure you do that because she's got a really helpful resource there for you all about how to strengthen college applications in general. I know we talked a lot about extracurriculars today, and so she's going to go a little bit beyond that in that guide to talk about more ways to strengthen your application. So I hope you get a copy of it and check that out because all of the information Julie puts out is so fantastic. So thanks again for joining us. This has been so fun, and I'm really glad we got a chance to catch up today.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation, and yeah, let's keep in touch.
That sounds great. And thanks everyone for joining us as well. And have a great day, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.